Hey y'all, it's Ziz here with another watercolor video. Pigments can be really expensive, so I set out on this journey to mix all the watercolors that I currently owned, and I even got a few new ones during this process because it took about a month and a half. I wanted to take the time in the beginning of this video to kind of just document and show y'all the process of how long it took to mix each of these individual circles, and then I do a little bit of it sped up. But if you'd like to skip that part, just go ahead and skip to all the real pretty colors and mixes that you'll see during the rest of the video. Smalt is one of the most recent colors that I've acquired. It's by Winsor & Newton, and I believe it has 2 mix pages, so I wanted to point out that some of the colors have more than 1 page. I think the Sennelier even has 3 pages, so there's a lot to go through in this one video. I wanted to keep it from getting way too incredibly long of a video, so that my phone can still export the video and upload it to YouTube for y'all. However, I was thinking about scanning these, but I don't have a scanner at home, so I think for now I'm going to make some separate videos and maybe just kind of categorize the colors in warm colors, cool colors, earth colors, something like that, so that we can take a little bit more time with some of my really favorite mixes. Here I am laying out all of my watercolor tubes. Most of these are single pigment with the exception of a few, and I'll put that in the description box, along with all of the colors and pigments and brands as well. This was truly a labor of love, not only for myself, selfishly, for my own records, but also for y'all to be able to see how, different brands and different pigments from different brands interact, and just really the amount of variety that you're able to achieve even with just a few colors. Okay, before we dive in, here's the short and skinny of these sheets. Each color is diluted across the top, and then each color you see on the page is mixed with it. First in my palette I have quinacridone burnt scarlet, and it's like a medium tinting strength, I would personally say, and it mixes really well with like a dark color like anthraquinone blue. But I really enjoy the buff titanium mixes here, where you get these like rosy peachy beige colors, and of course the fall kind of autumnal oranges that you can get with this color as well. Next we have English Red Earth by Daniel Smith. I really enjoy the subtlety of this pigment, and I think it makes some really interesting neutral tones with a green, but I really think it shines with the buff titanium, especially on some really nice paper for some portraits. For people with lighter skin, I think that would be really lovely for some blush, or even for some flower petals or something. Next up, we've got naphthamide maroon, also by Daniel Smith. I love mixing it and getting these darker versions of Potter's Pink. They all look pretty similar, but I did my due diligence of mixing them anyways. I also really love this one on the left here that split with the yellow pigment. Next, we have my favorite color, maybe it's hard to choose, but Potter's Pink. It's kind of hard to see on the cellulose paper because you get so much texture from the granulation, but all of these mixes are gorgeous. Pretty much every color you mix with Potter's Pink, especially if they don't have a strong tinting strength, mix really nicely. In fact, I may do a whole video just on mixes with Potter's Pink because I think it deserves a bit of a spotlight. Up close, these are so beautiful. Next up, we've got buff titanium, and you can clearly see this was the first sheet that I mixed because it's a little bit wonky, but I think it still serves its purpose just fine, other than not having the dilution gradation of the buff titanium, which isn't really that interesting anyways on its own, but anything mixed with buff titanium I'm probably going to like at this point. Next up, we've got the Barbie page, aka Rose of Ultramarine, which is a double pigment by Daniel Smith. And you can see that I really love these like weird mixtures that it can create. I think there's a lot more to explore here, but I wanted to give you a good close-up of some of these weird kinds of various colors that you can achieve with this double pigment paint. Caput mortuum is really a beautiful pigment just all on its own. I love like the mink kind of colors you can get when you dilute it, or here with the buff titanium. It's also just really lovely. It adds like this violety hue to some of these earth tones, which I think would be really fun to explore for lots of different types of paintings. Barbie page number 2, aka quinacridone lilac, kind of speaks for itself. It's really easy to mix with, and it's a pleasure to paint with, especially this version by Rosa Gallery Paints. Pink is my favorite color, so the buff titanium, I mean pretty much every single mix on this page to me is usable and gorgeous and worth exploring in some of my upcoming paintings. And maybe for some of y'all's too, if you get inspired by this page as much as I did. Next up, we have green gold. I love this pigment. It's so bright without being like jarring, like it still goes with so many of the other colors in my palette, whether they're mixed with other colors or just as the standalone single pigments. But I particularly love these greens at the bottom of this page. I also really like it mixed with quin lilac to get these really beautiful autumnal orangey colors. Verona Green Earth by Lukas is, I think it's actually, I like it. I think it's my favorite even over Potter's Pink. It mixes really well, even though if you get it in the pan like I did to mix these, it's so difficult to get a really strong tinting strength because it's a low tinting strength. But if you get it in the tube like I ended up doing, because I knew I was going to use a lot of it, it's a lot more pleasant to work with, and it works well glazing over. I wanted to emphasize that with these little lines here. But in general, even just diluted or by itself, it's such a gorgeous pigment. It's so earthy, but it still has the coolness, and it just goes with every other color in my palette. You can't really go wrong with this color. I really like these goethite mixes and the earthiness that it brings. Turquoise, in this case cobalt turquoise, isn't really that interesting to me for mixing. It's very beautiful diluted on its own, but I think it really makes the most sense for me in my work to push it more yellow or more blue and cool, and see kind of what you can achieve with the granulation it offers, especially in non-granulating blues like anthraquinone blue. Now, alternatively, with a color like cerulean blue, you can utilize the brightness and the extreme granulation it has in more muted colors and still have that kind of middle ground between really muted and really bright saturation from cerulean blue. So I'm super excited to use this on some nice cotton paper. Serpentine is really interesting on its own, but I don't really like the dilution where you can see some of like the orangey in it. I know some people love that. It's just not really my thing. But I really liked mixing it with shadow green here and with some of these other greens and yellows to be able to change up the way that this pigment likes to granulate and separate. And I think that's what makes some of these Prima-Tex by Daniel Smith really interesting and valuable in your palette. As far as I know, Shadow Green by Holbein is the first perylene green pigment that was created and sold, I guess, as a watercolor. And that's the pigment PBk11, a black pigment. And although it has a really large drying shift, as most of us have figured out, it still mixes wonderfully. Here's another multi-pigment, Lunar Blue by Daniel Smith. I love these kind of icy gray colors that it's given with the buff titanium. I think that's my favorite of the mixes of these, but it mixes very interesting colors from the phthalo and then the granulation of the black that is also mixed in. These yellow and green blues remind me of like an apocalyptic video game, and it's getting close to Halloween, so I'm digging it. When I was researching blues, it took me a really long time to summarize, but I am so glad that I stumbled across Anthraquinone Blue by M. Graham. It is my perfect mixing blue, like as an alternative to ultramarine. It just mixes so well with every single color I've mixed it with, and I'm sure it will continue to mix well as I add more colors to my palette. Goethite is another one that at least I don't think has a very high tinting strength. I can look this kind of thing up if I'm really curious, but for the most part I just kind of go with my gut. But with that said, of course the earthiness and granulation it brings on some cotton paper especially is going to be absolutely necessary to have in my palette. The raw umber is kind of like the non-granulating version of Goethite, and this is by Winsor & Newton. I'm not 100% certain because I'm not an expert or a watercolor paint maker, but I think there's too much gum arabic or something in the production of this paint, or at least the tube I have, so I don't like how it kind of balls up into these dark spots that you see, but the earthiness of this color is just perfect. This nickel titanate from Daniel Smith has actually been surprisingly useful in mixing a huge variety of colors. I really love these kind of autumnal colors, but they're not so punchy. They're a little more pastel from this main nickel pigment, and I've really been enjoying mixing with it. Out of my reds, I have 3 that are basically like the same hue, but they all have slightly different properties. So this is an English Red by Rosa Gallery, and you can see if you go back and compare to like the Quin Burnt Scarlet and English Red Earth that they all have a slightly different way of interacting with other pigments that I find really helpful in my mixes. When I was nearing the end of completing all of these mixing sheets, Smalt by Winsor & Newton came in the mail, and it totally changed a lot of the ways that I was mixing. It's a very interesting pigment. It's PB15, but it's so close to like a blue, but it's kind of like caput mortuum, just in the sense that you have that violet hue kind of peeking through in everything you mix, and it makes it look more vibrant if you mix it with blues, and it also just lends another layer of interest to like the yellow, the nickel titanate, and then this shadow green. You can just see how it looks a little bit different than maybe an ultramarine would. The other color that came in the mail with smalt was raw sienna. This is by Lukas. It does not really look like a raw sienna in terms of like what a watercolor or maybe oil paint would generally look like, and that's exactly what I was looking for. I'm not sure yet if I'm sold on it, however, I love it in every single one of these mixes, so I'm not sure what's holding me back. I feel like maybe there's like a little bit of, it's not chalkiness, I don't know what it is, but I don't like the hue on its own. I guess maybe that's it. But I love it in literally every single one of these mixes, and I'm gonna be using it a lot. And luckily for me, Lukas is very generous and has like a 24 milliliter tube, and I got it for like $10 on sale at Jerry's Artarama. So yeah, very beautiful color. This Sennelier Yellow Light is another color I hate on its own. I do not like bright colors, so I made sure to leave it off of all my other mixing sheets. That's how much I don't like bright colors. But of course, as you probably know, yellow, a primary yellow like that, medium, yellow is essential in anybody's palette, and you can see from these very beautiful mixes that I'm not really gonna have any issues. And Sennelier is also fairly generous with their tube, so it's going to function very well in my palette. I'm excited to try other yellows in the future to see like what difference there might be, like Hansa yellow, medium or whatever. But I'm super pleased, and I love the formulations of Sennelier paints. So I especially love the smalt mix that I threw in here at the end. And then we should have one more page for the Sennelier Yellow Light. Some of these, like the raw umber, again has that like weird gumminess texture to it, but I really enjoyed mixing, even though it took a long time to mix 3 whole pages of this. I think it was totally worth it, and I'm excited to get these scanned so that y'all can see some of the nuances in some of these swatches. We have finally made it to the end. Last but not least, Lunar Black, PBk11 by Daniel Smith. It is very, very granulating, of course, and separating, I would say. It's really good for texture and creating some intense kind of wet on wet techniques. It can be very helpful for me personally. I'm thinking for Halloween, that type of a thing, but I also really found out that I love diluting it down and using it just as like for value paintings of only black, and white paintings. It looks very like film noir to me. We have reached the end of the video. I really hope that you enjoyed all of these mixes. Of course, I didn't want to take a really long detailed look at every single individual circle, but if there are any that you want me to further document or show y'all, let me know down in the comments. Let me know some of your favorite mixes, and I guess I'll see you guys in the next watercolor video. Bye!